This is Paul Schneiderman today on the 56th edition of Sports and Stuff on RainierAvenueRadio.world, a Seattle-based station on the World Wide Web. I have as a very special guest today Seattle Mariners General Manager Jerry Dipoto. I want to go over a few housekeeping things here at Rainier Avenue Radio. There's a lot going on in our station, news shows, music shows, political shows. We have a great sports department. My engineer today, Chad Anderson, is the host of a great new rap show. A lot of my interviews are on my law firm website, plslawoffices.com, and on Mixcloud. Well, my guest today, Jerry Dipoto, has been the Mariners general manager since 2015. Jerry was part of the great 2004 Boston Red Sox squad as a scout. Jerry grew up in New Jersey, played at Virginia Commonwealth University, also played Major League Baseball for about 7 years. Jerry worked for several franchises before landing as the general manager of the Seattle Mariners. Jerry, thank you for coming on Sports and Stuff on Rainier Avenue Radio.
Oh, I'm glad to join, Paul.
Really appreciate it. It was nice to meet you at that great Fred Hutch event a few weeks back. Well, Jerry, many people around the country in the Pacific Northwest know about your work as a baseball executive. Why don't you take a minute and share with us how you got the baseball bug as a young kid growing up in New Jersey? Baseball has obviously been a big part of your life.
I mean, it's probably in some ways, whether you wanted to or not, baseball has kind of defined my life. I've done it since I can remember. I mean, my earliest photo is of my dad taking me out to the pitcher's mound at Doubleday Field in Cooperstown and taking a little shot when I was just an infant, and played Little League baseball, high school, college. Went off and signed a professional contract with the Cleveland Indians in 1989, and came through the system, made my major league debut with the Indians in May of 1993, pitched the next 8 years in the big leagues, and retired in the spring of 2001, and immediately went into front office work in March 2001, and I've been doing it ever since. I love it. I've experienced the game from about any level you could imagine, from a minor to a major league player to, a scout in the field, a front office person, directing departments like player development and scouting, and now for the last 8 years as a general manager for a couple of different clubs, which is it's very gratifying, and I've had the different experiences of building high-powered teams. We had a 98-win team a handful of years ago when I was with the Angels, and currently with the Mariners while rebuilding a roster that we're very excited about where it's headed and the progress that we've made. So baseball has been all of my work life. It's been most of my young growing life, and my wife and kids were either married or born into it, and they have had no choice, but they love it too.
Well, it sounds like it's almost a genetic thing, Jerry, baseball for you. And as you mentioned, you've seen the game and worked in the game in so many different facets. So it's fun to hear more about your background. I think my listeners will enjoy learning a little bit more about you. Jerry, you had an approximate 7-year career as a major league pitcher, I think from about 93 to 2000. You pitched almost 500 innings, by the way, which I didn't realize before I was doing my pre-show research for your interview. Can you mention like one or two really fond memories that you had in your Major League Baseball playing career?
Sure. I think by Major League service, I ended up with a tick over 8 years of service, and the bulk of which was spent in the National League. 6 years in the National League with the Mets and the Rockies, and a couple of years at the outset with the Indians, with some DL time at the very end with the Rockies. But I think the easy thing to remember is that you got to live your dream. And I will never forget the first time I stepped out on the Major League field. I was as nervous as could be, warming up in the bullpen in old Cleveland Municipal Stadium. We were playing the Kansas City Royals, and I came running into the game. I'm throwing my warm-up pitches, and Mike McFarland's getting ready to step in the box, and the only thing I can think about is, oh my gosh, that's George Brett standing over there.
Oh, yeah.
And it was an unbelievable experience, probably for most players. And I can say this, having never been on the field as a World Series winning player, for most players that have never won a World Series and competed in that type of environment, the thing they usually remember most is their first day. And that's similar to me. I played for some teams that were better than others, and I loved every second of it along the way. I got to play for my favorite childhood team. I grew up in, like you said, in New Jersey. I was a New York Mets fan as a kid, and big Tom Seaver fan in the 70s before he was traded off to Cincinnati. And then, begrudgingly followed him when he got over to the Reds, but always remained a Met fan. And then had the pleasure of pitching there, which is another great thrill for me. Just being able to pitch for my boyhood team, that was a blast. And then the individual things, I usually remember the negative moments more than the positive, the home runs you gave up or the saves you blew along the way, because they tend to stick out. But there were so many positive moments along the way as well, and most of them were the camaraderie that you shared with teammates.
And very few major league players played as long as you did, Jerry, either. So that you definitely had a good career there. This is Paul Schneiderman, host of Sports and Stuff on Rainier Avenue Radio with Seattle Mariners general manager Jerry Dipoto. This is going to be more of a condensed, probably 15, 20-minute version of Sports and Stuff today. We're going to get into some more great topics with the Mariners GM. Jerry, you've openly referred to the 2019 Mariners season as, I think, a step-back year. I don't want to put too many words in your mouth, Jerry, but you've come up with a great line. You want to reimagine the roster. What are some good things that you've seen on the field in this 2019 season, Jerry, despite the likely last place finish?
We didn't anticipate being a contender this year, and I would say that's probably not very different than the way we feel headed into 2020. We knew that this was going to be a 2-year project, and just turning our roster over and putting our future more in the center of our game plan rather than whatever comes next, so to speak. So, 2019 for us was a year to start gathering the assets to build with, and that has certainly happened. You at the major league level, we are in last place in the West. We're going to have to climb hard to get out of this position before the season ends. We look at this as a building opportunity, and what we've seen here, the continued solid performance of Marco Gonzalez at the top of our rotation. He's been 2 years of just steadiness. Watching some of the younger players ascend to the big leagues. I guess most especially J.P. Crawford, who arrived in May,
Sure,
and has solidified himself as an everyday player in the big leagues. At 24 years old, that's what we were looking for. It's most recently the additions of young players like Justice Sheffield and Jake Fraley, and then the development of players who might not be young in terms of building blocks like 22, 23 that you get from prospects, but young major league players like Tom Murphy and Omar Narvaez particularly, who have stepped up and done an excellent job for us this year and made themselves a part of at least the medium term at 27 and 28 years old. They're both very much a part of our plan moving forward. And then what we think is a flourishing minor league system that portends better things as we move ahead.
Yeah, there's been some good stuff. One thing lately, Jerry, it's been nice to see as a longtime Mariners fan chatting with you, is Kyle Seager's come back a little bit the last month or so.
Yeah, Siegs has been fantastic. And, I had the opportunity to walk into the ballpark with him the other day, and I said to him, I can't tell you how happy I am with the way that you have transitioned with this team. And, at the last year and a half, leading into 2019 for Kyle, had not been the best version of Kyle Seager. And I was fortunate enough in 2016, my first full season here, to see Kyle at the height of his ability, and it's just a fantastic player. This year, we are seeing a return to that level of play, which is very exciting for us. He seems very engaged in what we're doing, and I think as a result, the longest tenured Mariner position player he is really embracing what we're doing, and that's exciting. And it's only secondary to how good he's been on the field.
Yeah, no, some good stuff has been happening despite the record. Paul Schneiderman, again, of Sports and Stuff on Rainier Avenue Radio with the Mariners GM, Jerry Dipoto. So, when you look at the roster, Jerry, you got guys like Jared Kelenic, Adam Dunn, Evan White, Justin Sheffield. You got all these great Mariners likely great Mariners in the system right now. Do you anticipate, Jerry, though, making some free agent signings in early 2020s to help supplement a lot of these younger players that are going to be on the Mariner roster, it looks like, in the early 2020s?
I'd say it's unlikely. We're going into 2020 trying to build toward that group and give them opportunity. And it's hard to provide opportunity when the opportunity is being taken by veteran major league players. So, we're looking at more subtle, smaller signings, guys that can stabilize our roster, maybe closer to what you saw last year with some of the free agent additions that we made than anything splashy. And to set ourselves up for what we think is by mid-season, a young team that will be built around a lot of the prospects that are currently playing between Double and Triple A in our system. Hopefully guys like Logan Gilbert and Evan White and Kyle Lewis and perhaps Jared Kelenic and the Justin Dunns. And it's a really good group, and we feel like by mid-season next year, they're ready to go, and we don't see value in blocking their way in a season that we don't think we're going to make a push for the American League West.
So fans should not expect any bonanza free agent signings in the next couple of years, likely, then, Jerry?
I can't say the next couple of years. I can say 2020, we are likely to start with a young building roster. By mid-season or July 2020, we'll let our young roster and the development of that roster help us determine when we can, it would make sense for us to go out and add. That could be as early as July of 2020, or it could be sometime in 2021. But we're fully right now invested in building from the grassroots level and believe that it's going to bear fruit.
Yeah, we'll have to see what happens. Looking forward to it. By the way, Jerry, that great reimagining the roster line, it's definitely gotten some talk. Did you come up with that line, by the way?
Yeah, it's gotten some talk. Sometimes the talk is ridicule, but I think it was an office project where I asked everybody to take an empty roster, so effectively a 25-man roster accounting for each position on the field, and we guaranteed contracts were included, and they had to include the contract unless they were hypothetically trading it along, and then asked them to look around the league, look for trade partners, free agents, etc., and reimagine the roster to look like whatever they wanted it to look like. And that project turned into there were, I would say, a handful of our baseball personnel who took part, and by handful I mean more than 10, less than 20, and each of them had some form of a rebuild. So that led us to all right, how are we going to do this if we don't want to go through the long 5, 6, 7-year rebuilds that are required at the baseball level? It's, baseball rebuilds generally take somewhere between 5 and 7 years to reach their peak. Sure. And we wanted to figure out a way to cut that in half, and hopefully we've tapped into that. Time will tell, but we feel like the early returns so far look pretty good.
By the way, I wasn't ridiculing the reimagining the roster line. I think it's just a very clever kind of CEO business world line, so I want to share that with you. I just think it's just a line that I think's captured a lot of people in the Pacific Northwest and around the country when the way you described you wanted to transform the roster. Jerry, you probably never had this specific question before, but something I've always been curious about, a trade deadline question. So maybe modern technology helps take care of this, but what happens if, say, you're on the phone with the Nationals 5 or 7 minutes before the trade deadline, and say the GM of the Marlins is trying to call you a couple minutes before the deadline? How do you make sure you don't miss a call right before the trade deadline?
In those moments, you hit mute and you ask one of the assistants in the room to call his counterpart with the Marlins and make sure it stays live. But for the most part, you going into deadline day, or even let's call it at least by mid-morning on deadline day,
yeah,
most of the teams that you are going to do business with, you've been engaged with for quite some time. You're not going to receive very many dry calls that late in the process. You may receive a call deadline week where somebody engages you that you weren't previously expecting, but for the most part, the conversations leading into the July trade deadline are oftentimes starting roughly the day after the June draft ends. So sometime in the first week of June every year is when the trade discussions begin. So most of what we do on July 31st has generally been brewing since June 10th. So it's not a short, quick burst. We typically know exactly where we're going. It's just a matter of, will somebody meet your price or will you acquiesce?
Well, thank you for sharing that. I was just kind of wondering, maybe some fans were too, that maybe a half hour or even 10 minutes before the deadline, some major call could come in. But I think your elaboration on how the system works at least educated me a little bit. Paul Schneiderman again on Sports and Stuff. We got a couple minutes left with the Mariners general manager, Jerry Dipoto on RainierAvenueRadio.world. Jerry, there's been a lot of talk going on about baseball rules changes. Like Independent Atlantic League has enacted all sorts of rules changes, including a rule that allows, I believe, a batter to try to steal first base. What are some of your feelings about some of these proposed rules changes in the game of baseball?
I think it's necessary. You know, baseball is probably as close to its original version as any of the major sports. And by original, I mean the game that we started playing in the 1870s. So it's while the game has grown and the players have certainly evolved in terms of their physicality, the things they're capable of doing, whether it's high-end velocity or over-the-fence home run power, our athletes have evolved, and the game, one of the romantic aspects of baseball is that it does remain very, very similar to the way it was played so many years ago.
Right.
And, in order for the game to remain relevant, to remain in the with some degree of fan appeal, I think you have to grow with time. And I applaud MLB for attempting to make the types of changes to the way the game is played that might allow for the game to be played a little quicker. And by quicker, I mean on the clock. I also mean with the speed, the pace of the game. Watching baseball played at a fast pace is really fun. And I think a lot of what you're seeing now is built around the idea of speeding a game up, both in how long the games take and in the entertainment value of what's happening on the field. Because particularly in the last handful of seasons, the game has gotten a little slow. It's very much built around three true outcomes: strikeouts, walks, and home runs. And while the home runs are exciting and the strikeouts, depending on who you favor, can also be exciting, that doesn't lend itself to a very active game. And a lot of these suggested rule changes are trying to do just that: speed up and make the game more interesting.
Well, Jerry, I appreciate it. If we had some more time, I'd probably pick your brain more on some of the specific proposed rules changes. We got like maybe a minute left, and I can't help it. My curiosity just is so rampant sometimes. I could talk to you for hours, but wouldn't do that to Jerry. Felix Hernandez is an iconic part of the Seattle sports landscape. Can you envision any hypothetical scenario where Felix could be on the 2020 Mariners roster?
I have a wild imagination, so the answer is yes. I can envision a scenario where he's here. I would say that, a lot of where Felix is over the last 3 or 4 years is a result of how awesome he was for the previous 10 or 11 years. And, for a decade, Felix was among the best in the game and carried very high inning totals, oftentimes at very young ages, and dominated oftentimes the league around him. And, the last 3 or 4 years have not been as good. That's been very clear to everybody, including us and Felix. But, we are a team that is built right now toward the future. We are trying to get younger. And while there is a scenario where I can envision moving forward, that's mostly the iconic version of Felix. You want to stay connected to your great players. And, I don't want to forsake the possibility that happens, but we view our future as being Marco Gonzalez and Yusei Kikuchi and Justice Sheffield and Justin Dunn and ultimately Logan Gilbert and others. And again, it's very hard to give them opportunity unless you provide the innings to do that.
Jerry, really enjoyed.
While I'll stay open-minded, it's not a guarantee.
Jerry, sorry for interrupting. I really enjoyed having you come on Sports and Stuff on Rainier Avenue Radio. Let's you and I stay in touch. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Bob.
You take care.